Good evening, everyone. It's morning here, but in New Zealand, but good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Barbara Sumner. I'm an adopted person. I have for the last, I don't know, about 10 years become an activist, I guess, in fighting for our rights to be equal citizens. Um, and a lot of my work is around the ways in which we are not equal citizens, the ways that we are treated quite differently. The book that I have coming out next year called Bastards, Adoption and the Manufacture of Identity. I know the title is really controversial and I've had a lot of positive, but also, a reasonable amount of negative response to that. And I think some of that is around this idea that, you know, language is a really big deal in adoption. Um, we have this positive adoption language. I'm sure you've all heard about that, PAL, and all the ways in which, um, like, there's organizations that say things like, by using positive adoption language, we help, what do they say? We help abolish the myth society has perpetuated that adoption is a second best or lesser alternative. And, they swap adopted child for my child, replace unwanted with waiting or unplanned child, change adoptable or available to waiting child or child in need, and dispense with given away or relinquished in favor of adoption planning. Reunion has become locate, and the viscosity of blood relative or family is now a genetic ancestor. So we're facing a social situation where it hasn't changed for New Zealand 70 years. We've been hearing the same thing for so long, and I call it top-down networking, where positive adoption is the idea that it's a great thing and a win-win, has become part of our general understanding of what it is in society, that we are the lucky ones. I don't know about you, but I don't feel that lucky. One of the things I wanted to talk about is that being adopted is not destiny. It's a legal framework, and it's a bureaucratic statutory process that severs ties to ancestry, erases birthright, seals records, and reconstructs identity. The head of the now emeritus, but the head of the law department at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand, when I asked him, and this is his area, and I asked him what adoption actually is, and he said it was a statutory process to change a person's status from illegitimate to legitimate. But the word illegitimate was removed from every piece of legislation in 1969. So I asked him why is adoption still a thing? Why is it not abolished? And his response was that he felt that it was outside the remit of my thesis, so he wouldn't answer it. So I still don't know why we still have adoption when we have other forms of childcare, of supporting children that have welfare needs. We have forms of guardianship, for instance. We have other pieces of legislation that recognize welfare situations. Adoption has never been about welfare. The 1955 Act that is still, in operation in New Zealand doesn't mention welfare. It's entirely, as most of us know, about providing children to meet adult desire. So this is the basis of the work that I do, is trying to unpick those social fictions. One of the things I did want to talk about is how our identity is so fictionalized that I had a situation recently where I was conceived in the UK and my mother was sent out to New Zealand when she was pregnant with me. And I was then adopted into a family that were from an entirely different cultural background, and cultural, social, and genetic background. And the New Zealand law is very clear. It says that we have that the adopted child shall be deemed to become the child of the adoptive parent, and the adoptive parent shall be deemed to become the parent of the child, as if the child had been born to that parent in lawful wedlock. It's this word, these two words that form the entire basis of adoption, and that's as if. And I believe that there's almost nothing more powerful in the English language than as if, because it's an entirely performative term, and it is concomitant on us as adopted people to perform the role of the child that the adopters didn't have, couldn't have, chose not to have. As a quick little aside, I made a comment on a Quora question app that I often comment on about an actress, Millie Bobby Brown, I think, who's taken a child, someone else's child, and said that it's absolutely no different, and why would she have her own child when she could have this one? And I said, well, because she's a child trafficker, and it's got me banned for life for saying the words child trafficker. So we are as if born to. And there's been the thing about using New Zealand as my the basis for my work is that it's a fantastic case study, that it's a very small country. We're very keen on adoption. We were at one point in the early 70s, we were adopting more children per head of population than any other country. It's not just one act, it's been routinely updated and embedded in new legislation. And for instance, we had 2 years ago, there was a major update to the Births, Deaths, Marriages and Relationships Act that provided for one group of people the right to change their sex in their original documents. At the same time, adopted people to get that original document, and to have any control, never have any control over it. This other group of people were able to say who could see their original documents and who couldn't. And at the same time, adopted people were again written into the act that they had to either go to court to see that original document. They had to prove that their adopters and their birth parents were dead. They had to be dead themselves. We had to be dead ourselves, or we had to have turned 120. And so this is in brand new legislation. So things aren't changing anytime soon here, or I believe in pretty much any other country. So we have this, there was a Supreme Court case that established that an adopted person can only have one legal mother and one legal father, and they have no relationship to their biological parents. So I thought, because my mother, both my natural parents were British and had been for, many, many generations, I thought I would give it a go and see, because I have an original birth certificate, even though it's endorsed with my adopter's information. I thought I would see if I could get a British passport. And I just recently succeeded in doing that. So now I have a two-mother problem. I have two legal mothers, and I'm waiting to hear back from our Ministry of Justice and Internal Affairs what that does to my status, because the reason why you can only have one legal parent is so that you must use your adoption birth certificate, is so that you can't use your earlier identity, your original identity, to create a false identity. And I have that in writing from them. So we're always caught we're never, we're we're given this identity and it's not ours, and we don't really connect with it, many of us, and we are denied this other opportunity. So I'm very interested to see where this is going to go now that I have in my hand a physical British passport and British citizenship, as well as New Zealand passport and New Zealand citizenship, based on one is based on my adopter's ethnicity and country of origin, and one is based on my mother's. So I'll be writing about that in the near future. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is diversity within our community. That we're a very diverse community, and some of that is around language, this positive adoption language that we're talking about, but also that we are divided very thinly, and because we don't have a language to because we are all mired in secrecy. Adoption is about secrecy, and so it's very difficult it was until basically, Facebook and these groups, it was very difficult to connect with other adopted people. I don't know about people in this group, but I know growing up, I didn't know that other people were adopted, or when I did know, I had no context for what that word actually meant. I didn't understand it. I did know that I was treated differently because of it, but I didn't, so one of the things that we have is where I was told early that I was adopted, but I had no context for it. I didn't know what it meant. And it was almost like, because I was told that was their duty. They didn't have to do anything beyond tell me. And to ask about it was disloyal. I'm sure many of us have experienced that. So I didn't know what it was to be adopted, even though that was the only thing I knew, but I had no way of understanding it. So our community I believe, is quite fractured, and I've been trying to work out how we can unfracture it, how we can join together. I mean, we have groups who are late disclosure, who have a very different experience of being denied the most basic truths. We have intercountry. We have different forms of intercountry adopted people. We have people that were adopted by wealthy people, and that alters their relationship to adoption. We have a person who actually just lives one street away from me here, who was a member of parliament, an adopted person whose adoptive great-grandfather started the main left-wing party. It was that name was very important to him, and he refused to acknowledge that adoption was anything, and still does, because the name mattered. It was a wealthy family that he was adopted into. So and then we have people that are adopted by Christians, for moral reasons, as their adopters are saviors, have a savior complex. So that experience again is different. Some people are adopted at birth and have issues around maternal separation. Others are, in care for longer periods of time, or adopted from foster. And some have full disclosure and some don't. So I think the points around this is that we need to, we're constantly being, I know I am on my main Facebook page, there's a lot of conversation around good and bad adoption. And that somehow if you had a good adoption, you struggle to be disloyal, as many think, to their adopters, or you maintain very strongly that adoption hasn't affected you. And so how do we how do we come together as a community is the question that interests me the most. And not just come together to support each other, but to create change when we are being hammered from the inside almost, where, I'm constantly talking about that my work is not about good or bad adoption, that it is in fact about all the ways that adoption others us, treats us as another class of person. A judge here in New Zealand responding to a woman negatively that one was trying to get her adopt all her records, said that adopted people were a special class of persons to whom records were not available. And I've always found that a most telling statement, because that is the thing that joins all of us, no matter how we've come to be in this position, is that we are all of us controlled by legislation in different countries that has the same intent, that is to keep us from knowing who we are or being able to have any relationship with where we come from and who we are that is anything other than uh, personal. Like you're legally, I have two half sisters on my mother's side and one on my father's side. None of us are legally connected to these people who are our blood relatives. If I hadn't found them, I'm medically compromised in a couple of ways. And if I hadn't already made that work to find my family, I would have no access to understanding where that medical situation comes from. These are some of the ways in which all of us are othered, no matter how we come to this position of adoption, of being adopted people. So it's I think it's a terrible thing to be adopted. I don't think it's lucky. I don't think any of us are advantaged by it, even when if we are financially advantaged, if we are adopted by wealthy people or purchased by wealthy people. We are not, there is very little advantage in it because of all these other ways that we are treated as second-class citizens. I guess that's really the areas that I want to that I'm really interested in talking about. The book that was my thesis, it was called Adoption. I can't even remember what my thesis was called now. My goodness. But Bastards is the way I think we are considered, that we are people of a lesser value who have lesser rights, fewer rights. And others think of us in this way socially, even if they don't say it. And the state considers us this as well. And certainly here in New Zealand, the state does not want us to become empowered. We've had a number of things that made it, in the last 3 or 4 years, it's made it seem like there's going to be law change. There were 2 very large 70-plus page discussion documents that the Ministry of Justice presented to the adoption community, although they didn't advertise it. So not very many people filled these forms in, but the entire wording was from the perspective of adoption as a good thing and adopters' rights. And we then and then any law change that may have come from that was put on hold because we had a Royal Commission of Inquiry into abuse in state-based care, which was children who'd gone mainly from foster care into or straight into homes for people that were misbehaving in society and were terribly abused. And so I presented to them, and I was a consultant for them, and I presented that all adopted people are in state care, because it is the home that you're in is the home that the state allocated to you. And therefore, we had a right to speak at this and to give our, to tell our stories at this Royal Commission. And in the end, many adopted people did tell their stories of abuse within their homes. But of course, it was a flawed way of going about it, because if you had a problem with adoption, legally, or just, the moral concerns around identity, you couldn't speak to the Royal Commission because you weren't abused. And so adoption itself was not seen as abuse. And I believe that adoption itself is abuse. And the people that had been in state care in these homes were able to apply to another ministry um, for reparations for what had happened to them. Adopted people who gave evidence of abuse in their adoptive homes were not able to apply for that reparations, because their response was that the state cannot compensate for bad parenting. So again, we then fall back to this idea of as if, that we are as if owned by our adopters, and we are no different. I like to use the term adoptological, that the biological and the adoptological families have been, the point is to pass as biological, and everything is done to make us pass as biological families. And I find that to be, that is at the heart of what is wrong. I mean, yes, there's the legal things to do with having our identity taken, and that we have so fewer rights, but it's that we are forced to act as if we are the children of people who are genetic strangers in many cases. I guess that these things are at the heart of the work that I do.